Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Pike. I am a member of the Realtor Attorney Joint Committee. Welcome to our program on property management, which is actually being put on by the Realtor Attorney Joint Committee in conjunction with the Property Management Committee. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to be introducing our speakers, and then what's going to happen is they're going to give a few short they'll talk a little bit. And we're going to be opening this up ultimately. Can you please post the host contact info? I don't know. We have a question. Where did she go? Denise, we have a question.
It will be posted.
It will be posted, yes. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to do everything all at once. In any event, we're going to have a little bit of a talk. Then we will open it up for questions. For those of you who are out there, please feel free to put your questions into the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat for you. If something comes up and I see it's something terribly important, I will interrupt and try and ask our panel the question. If I don't get to the question, it's not that I'm dissing you, it's just that I didn't either see it or we're moving on to something else. So first, Kelly Oakes. Kelly Oakes is a second-generation realtor who obtained her Wisconsin's broker license in 1987 and was a multi-million producer, relocation manager, and licensed Wisconsin real estate instructor until she moved to Florida in 2001. After spending some time at her home with her three sons, she obtained her Florida real estate license in 2007 and broker license in 2018. In 2011, she started in property management, and in 2013, her company was acquired by Berkshire Hathaway Florida Realty, where she has been the supervisor of the property management division for the Northwest and Central region. Currently, Kelly oversees 11 offices and 19 property managers. BHHS Florida Realty handles annual, vacation rentals, and commercial rentals. Kelly is also an advocate for children with disabilities and assists parents with drafting enforceable, measurable, and attainable education goals. Thank you for being here for us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Still a Packer fan.
Cheeseheads. Okay.
Take the girl out of Wisconsin.
And I'd also like to introduce to you Garrett T. Barnes. He's an attorney with Barnes Walker. Garrett Barnes graduated from St. Stephen's Episcopal School in Bradenton, received his Bachelor of Science degree in business from Wake Forest University at Winston-Salem, North Carolina in May 1987, and earned his Juris Doctorate degree from Stetson University College of Law in Gulfport, Florida in May 1991. He was admitted to the Florida Bar in 1991. Garrett is married with 3 children. His community and professional commitments include being a past director of the Manatee County chapter of the American Red Cross, a past director of the United Way of Manatee County, a past president and trustee of the Board of Trustees of St. Stephen's Episcopal School, a past member of the Kiwanis Club of Bradenton, past vice president of the Board of Trustees of the South Florida Museum, and past secretary and member of the vestry for Christ Episcopal Church, and current member of RAJC. Garrett is a member of the Florida Bar, its real property, probate, and trust law section, and the Manatee County Bar Association. He practices in the area of real property law, residential and commercial transactions, land development and planning, administrative law, and business law. Let's give a hand. Thank you for being here for us. Thank you. So, ladies first.
Yes.
Kelly, do you have a statement that you'd like to talk to us? A general overview of what's going on?
My goal today is just to help you identify the new short-term rental requirements that are imposed on Sarasota and Manatee counties, and just help guide you with some let's start over. Guide you with some tricks and tips that we use in our office that may be helpful to you, and then answer some other oddball questions regarding leasing, whether you have a property that you might want to list that has a tenant in there, and just some other things that Garrett might bring up.
Thank you.
Sound like the ball was just shifted.
It did.
Take it.
Yeah, I'm the legal side of this, and when I wrote a article in the RAJC magazine about this, and when I was first started to tackle this thing, oh, that'd be easy, was it 500 word letter limitation? Then I got the, okay, well, there's Manatee County, Sarasota County, City of Sarasota, there's Holmes Beach, Palmetto, Braden Beach, and City of Anna Maria. And so, and each one of them can and does treat short-term rentals differently. So it was a daunting task to take my first draft, which is about 5 pages, down to 1 or 1.5. But my point being to tell you this is that it is very complicated, and you have to, and what we were talking about, if you have a question about this in your practice, you just need to call and make sure, because there's so many different rules, definitions, requirements, that type of thing, that it's very difficult for you to remember. In that regard, I took the liberty to prepare a comparative analysis, I think, which each one of you have, that I thought would be very helpful to, in one glance or just a few pages, to see the comparisons between all the different municipalities and counties. And it's going to be a very useful tool for this discussion, as well as you in your practice. One thing to remember is that the state of Florida statute 509 basically took over the transit public lodging for anything, for any city or municipality that was after 2011. And so, but the cities and counties can regulate some of the, they can't not do it, they can regulate how to do it. On top of that, you've got all your HOAs and associations that can put restrictions on those as well. So there's many different levels of regulation, rules, restrictions, that type of thing that we have to consider. And so we basically have to talk about generalities, and then you ask questions, we can get into details.
I think so. Thank you. And actually, that kind of leads to a very good question. Kelly, maybe you can answer this. Is there any one umbrella place that you can go to find out what you need to know if you're going to be doing short-term rentals?
A good place to start would be the tax collector page for the county. It's going to give you some basic information. You could look under their tab for tourist tax. In Sarasota County, you'll actually see a little brief guideline of the rental rules for the different zoning descriptions. So for instance, if you're zoned A1 and on the barrier island, leases are not required to be at least 30 days, but the barrier islands include Siesta Key, KCK, blah, blah, blah. So that's a good place to start. But as Garrett said, really, there's so many new ordinances in addition to whatever the county ordinance may have. There may be some local ordinance change, there may be an HOA change. So it's really best to do your due diligence, check every source you can, and make sure you have the most up-to-date information. I always call whatever association that the property may be affiliated with. I call the CAM, ask them, can I have your most up-to-date rules and regulations and application? Because the homeowner may not even realize a new restriction was passed in their community. And so they may not be able to lease. And you really want to make sure you check those regulations in addition to the city and county regulations.
And they're adding to what you did, there's a lot of liability. You know, if you have a client that wants a transient or a short-term rental property, and all of a sudden you did a great job, they buy it, the next day they find out they can't do it, guess whose finger they're going to point to? So it's very important. The biggest tip I think we're going to give you is do your homework up front and ask questions on what city, municipality, county, association, that type of thing.
You know, and that's a great for a follow-up question. What are the basic questions that should be asked up front?
That you or me?
Well, are we talking?
Go ahead. When you're taking a new client comes into these people
Sure.
and says, hi, I've got a beautiful place that I want to rent out. What do I do?
Yeah, so if you're in property management or want to do property management, I'm going to back it up even before that and say, talk to your broker first. Make sure your broker will allow you to do that. Get some training. There's definitely different designations that you can get. There's also classes that you could attend. Harry Heist is the attorney firm that we use for our annual leases. He has 6 hours classes. In fact, I think he has one coming up in November. Get some basic information because it is a different ballgame. You can't just roll with the punches on this and not have some extreme liability if you don't know what you're doing. So now fast forward to your question. We have a sheet that we have just general questions that we ask someone interested in property management. For instance, what's their reasoning? So people have different reasonings, and once you get to talk a little bit more, you may not want to manage this property depending on what their response is. But you also want to know, have they ever been a landlord? Are they familiar with what's expected, and are they familiar with the Florida statutes? They may live in another state. Their state statutes for renting could be completely different than what we have in Florida. So.
And it's just trying to understand your client, what they are looking for and trying to find that need. And don't guess, again, figure out exactly what they're wanting and then research what properties might fit their need. As far as, what the different zonings are, I mean, there are just too many to talk about here as far as, do I want to be in Anna Maria? Do I want to be in Hunts Beach or Siesta, that type of thing? That's why I prepared the comparative analysis sheet for you.
And Garrett, I assume, hopefully I'm not wrong, that when you are helping a property management person, company, that you help them with different forms that everybody should at least have in their folder. What are some of the documents that they should have at a very basic minimum?
Well, it's really, you deal with that more than I do.
Sure, so
I'm sorry.
that's okay. From our office perspective, we do not handle short-term or daily or transient rentals. That would be any rental that's less than 30 days. Our office only handles 30 days minimum. But if you are going to handle a transient rental, there's a complete separate license that you must get. Your office need to get it for each property. It's a 509 license, and you could go to DBPR. They actually have a nice little guide that you could print out and read the information required for properties, because there's a list of more extensive requirements for anything that's rented daily or weekly. For instance, their smoke detectors can't just be smoke detectors. They need to be the flashing sign in case people are deaf. The dishes need to be triple washed. So there's just some extra requirements that are not required on a 30-day minimum rental. And you really need to make sure your owner's aware of that, the expense to maintain all of that, and the extra additional licenses for them. Because in addition to the 509, they still would have to pay the tourist tax and the Department of Revenue. So, and whatever registration, certificates of registration would be required for their local ordinance as well.
There's a lot of, each city has their own registration. Manatee County, Palmetto, and Sarasota County does not, but all the others do. As far as what is registered, what is required in that registration. Peter, I don't have a form for each city.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
I do not have.
I don't either.
But that's what, again, this little handout would be helpful. But as you can see, as you're going through these, I mean, they're very different in what they require. Some of them are very simple, some of them are very, what's that?
Just say this is the Sarasota one, and that's the website. They
Okay.
Get it for the registration.
But some of them are simple, some of them very, very complex. For example, a layout of the building, 24-hour contact, where the parking is, noise ordinances, escape routes, where to post it, how to advertise, that type of thing.
What about a property management agreement? Is it a good idea for them to have something like that with their customers?
Absolutely. It's imperative that you do that because there's a lot of liability when you hire a property management company and to handle your property. And it's important that they have experience and the insurances and the back room to handle it, because it's a lot of work. People have no idea what property management folks do on a day in and day out basis. You want to add to that?
As again, I just, as a disclaimer, check with your broker. Because your broker would have to authorize that you'd be able to engage in property management services. And then your property management agreement should clearly identify your duties. What are the duties that you would be doing or your company would be doing? Would it just be securing a tenant? Would it be collecting the rent? Would it be posting the notices? Would it be paying different monthly invoices for the owner? So you really want to have clearly defined duties. You also want to have some clause of what would constitute an immediate termination if you needed to. What if the owner didn't pay? What if they're not solvent and they weren't paying anything? So you need to have some little escape clause for your broker in case the owner is not paying.
How do you, both of you, how do you feel about having some money in escrow from your owners in case something happens that you need to be able to make a repair, for example?
That's a great question. And of course, the owners want to put the least amount of money in. But when you're trying to secure a vendor and you need an immediate repair, especially if it's a landlord required repair, you're gonna need that money in there. So typically on average, we ask for 500. We're starting to push these accounts up to 1,000, especially on our foreign owners who we can't get a hold of readily. But it's imperative that you have some money on hand, and also that your property management agreement allows you up to a certain dollar amount without calling the owner, especially if it's an emergency repair.
Okay, I'd like to just let it, oh, do you have something? Please. Oh, we have a question.
I was just
Thank you.
listening to Kelly in regards to her 30-day. I'm aware that anything under 6 months is considered seasonal and is tax.
Okay, the question is, we were talking about 30-day rentals, and the question is it correct that anything under 6 months is considered a seasonal rental and subject to tax?
Yes, anything under 6 months is subject to sales tax.
What is the sales tax now?
6%,
It's a good thing.
7%.
Yes, so Manatee, I'm sorry, Sarasota
6%.
County just increased it October 1st from 5% to 6%.
Yes, Manatee and Sarasota.
Sorry, Sarasota, Manatee too.
Manatee too. I think Manatee is both 7%. I
Okay,
could be wrong.
I thought it was 6.
It was 6%.
Well,
no,
no,
just
I'm sorry,
Sarasota.
I'm thinking commercial rent tax, which is 6.5.
No, because we get notice.
Notice how, I mean,
You better check.
this is confusing for everybody, okay? If anybody tells you they know the answer right off the top of their head, they probably don't.
So go on the Sarasota tax collector site or the Manatee County website, tax collector site, and you can see exactly what the tourist tax is, and when in doubt, call.
And how does that get paid?
It's a landlord required remittance.
Does a landlord have to
To
set
the
up?
Department of Revenue.
Yeah, and is it correct, the landlord would have to set up their own accounts?
They have to set up their own account with the Department of Revenue for submittal.
Just for a little shout out there to everybody, probably a good idea for you to learn about all of that so you can walk them through it. Yes, in the back.
This kind of takes off the sales tax. I'm trying to move on. I can't.
It's okay.
I did some hospitality background, and I know they were holding like Airbnbs for short-term rentals to the hospitality tax as well, the tourism tax. So beware of that. They actually look at listings, they look at rental listings, tax collector, and they go out and go after it. So be ready for that.
Yes.
And the, I'm sorry, I'm just reading.
There's 5% Manatee and 6% Sarasota for the transient tax on top of the sales tax.
Okay, and just so everybody understands, what was pointed out was if you are doing very short-term rentals, Airbnbs, for example, it is an additional tax. It's a bed tax that has to be paid as well. Okay, are you familiar with, is that paid also through the same?
That's paid to the local municipality.
Okay, and I guess you've got to set up your own account there too.
Yes, that's why they have a registration requirement. Where the city or the area.
What is the percentage that you pay for that?
Was it like,
The percentage, you paid the 6% in taxes.
well, you paid it on the gross.
Hold on one second. What, the question is, what is the percentage that gets paid on something like that?
On Airbnb.
Like for an Airbnb?
Well, so there's several taxes, and honestly, I'm not going to speak on the short term or the less than 30-day tax because I don't handle any of those. But you could call and you can find out exactly what it is. But for Sarasota County, the tourist and sales tax would be 13%. Manatee County is 12%, but also you need to be aware, so if there's any cleaning or extra utilities or any overages, like the owner might provide electric up to a certain dollar amount and the tenant's responsible. Any extra fees that the tenant pays, those fees are also taxed at that tax level as well. So it's, if the cleaning rate is 400, it's 400 times the 12% as well. If there's a utility overage of $300 over a 3-month period, it's 300 plus the 12%.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's a percentage based on whatever they're paying.
In everything.
And remember, anything over 6 months, there's no sales tax, because that's considered long term.
6 months in a day.
Yeah.
So-
that's a 6 months.
My question is, so I have people who they want to buy an investment property and now Airbnb is such a big thing. They want to buy an Airbnb. I don't have enough knowledge to even vet them, to question them. It's like, certain considerations. So I know you don't do that, but do you have any, ideas, like what questions? I can vet them. They haven't bought the property yet. They want me to help them to buy the
Sure.
property. So.
Okay, the question that's being asked is a great question. It's, she has people coming to her who want her to find them an investment property for use as an Airbnb. Where does she start?
You start with a map. And that's find out where they're allowed.
Exactly, and that's gonna narrow your search
Exactly.
because it's gonna have to have really relaxed rental requirements or restrictions in order to maximize the money for that, if they're looking for a daily or a weekly. Alternatively, you might be able to show them what an annual rental might be able to show them. And at the end of the day, based on the seasonal months versus uninterrupted revenue from an annual, and put them in a hotel when they come to stay, maybe an unfurnished annual might be a better bet.
That's apples to apples comparison.
Yeah, so one of those searches that I did, I thought I found out that in Sarasota County, you cannot do short-term rentals like 7 days, less than that on the mainland. You can only do those on the Barrier Islands. Is that
That's
correct?
true.
The question is, it appears that you cannot do less than 7-day rentals in Sarasota County, other than in parts of the Barrier Island. Is that correct?
Yes, Sarasota has a minimum of 30.
But the
I
city, within the city limits, you can do
Well,
1%.
unincorporated Sarasota.
Oh,
So the city of Sarasota, the coastal islands, coastal barrier islands, has an overlay district that you can do the lesser.
But
Subject to the requirements that you follow, register applicable fees. But basically following what they want to do on their checklist, which
I
is
see.
10 items or whatever it is, and pay money.
I see.
and also on the mainland in the city of Sarasota, I believe that there is again that minimum, and I believe it's 30 days in the city on the
Yes.
mainland.
It's just the barrier islands that has that overlay.
Right. So please be very careful.
You can read that.
Okay, oh,
Right there.
you can go to, thank you. You can go to https://www.sarasota.gov/government/services/registration-guidance. Actually, I'd probably say just Google Sarasota and what you're putting in, and you'll get there. And the reason I want to make sure that you understood that about the city, I have a client who unfortunately didn't know and didn't get prepared and didn't do anything, and they were doing daily rentals within the city of Sarasota on the mainland. And by the way, what usually happens when you're doing that? How does the city find out?
The neighbor reports it.
The neighbors report it, and then all of a sudden, you've got nothing but headaches.
To clarify, there is a 1 week within the city of Sarasota,
It's a 1 week.
a minimum of a week that you can do. Other than that, there's no other requirement, but you do have to register with the DPPR up in Tallahassee.
Oh, 1 week, okay,
Okay,
that's
so,
different.
no, so that's a bit
But there's no
confusing.
local, in the city of Sarasota, there's no local registration. Only on the Barrier Island, you have to follow the registration requirements, because it's an overlay district.
Okay, so that, for me, is a bit confusing. So what I thought I read was that you cannot do those short-term rentals on any other, like on the mainland aside of the barrier islands. So in my mind, you can only do them on the islands, not in the city.
City, everywhere but the city on the mainland is 30 days minimum, except the city, which is a 1 week minimum.
I see.
And then you have to do the certificate of registration, which also requires several things and additional fees for the homeowner to do that.
We have a couple of very good questions from online, so if you don't mind. Could you please repeat the Sarasota County and Manatee County applicable rental taxes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. For my information, and this is, it's 7% floater sales tax, I think, for Manatee and Sarasota. The transient tax for Manatee County is 5% and the Sarasota is 6%. So the total for Manatee and Sarasota, if you're doing transient, is 12 and 13% respectively.
What about surcharge?
And question is, what about surcharge?
Surcharge,
One-
Is there a 1% set?
You're factoring that into your.
okay, that's in.
That's-
5%.
That's in the.
That's factored in.
Not five, it's, so you're.
Oh,
7%,
yes.
6%,
Right.
Factoring in 1%.
Plus 1% surcharge, yes, it's 6 plus 1, but we are doing the, it may be, what, 6.5 Manatee County? I thought it was 6 plus 1 in both counties.
I don't do much. I apologize. I really don't do much in this nitty gritty
One of the
within
same-
short-term rentals. I do more commercial type of things. I know that the commercial rent tax is 6.5, but that's something totally different, has nothing to do with transient.
Just follow up with the county and what the tax is.
And you know what? Actually, this next question may actually be of help for everybody. And this person says, I was under the impression that most property managers have a system, software, for collecting and paying the taxes so the owner doesn't have to do it. I imagine it can be quite complicated to explain to them how to do it. Do you know of any such programs? Is there something like that out there?
Well, our accounting departments run 2 different software programs. We have one for vacation rental, and we also have one for annual rentals. However, each property within our portfolio, if the tax is required, if it's a vacation rental, we do set up the taxing information on behalf of the owner as part of our duties. So again, you have to defer to your management agreement. What are your duties? What will you be doing, or what will your broker be doing on behalf of this owner when collecting the rent? Our software program might help calculate what it is, but it doesn't get the updates from the local municipalities. We have to call and find out, or we see it in the news, or the tax collector alerts our accounting department. And so that's why I'm sorry, I'm a little vague. I know our accounting department did alert us that Sarasota County had increased, but I was not aware of Manatee. But that doesn't mean I might not have an email saying that it did increase. Call and find out.
And
But this,
I'm sorry. go
but the software does help on many things, but it's garbage in, garbage out. So you really need to, you should just rely on a program, and you should be able to talk intelligently about what the fees will be, because the owners at the end of the day are gonna want to know, what is my net? What's the net to me? That's the important question. And you don't want to make a mistake on that number.
And I'd just like to point out, Kelly said something incredibly important. She said that her office's accounting department, one of the biggest places that realtors get into trouble with FREC is in not keeping proper track of all this money, because this is going to be your escrow money if you're taking it in, and paying it out properly and promptly. Please make sure if you're going to do this, that you have very, very good accounting controls in place. Give me 1 second, because there's one other question, which was a very good question. Come on back. Well, the question is, are you allowed to rent out rooms in Manatee County?
If it's if you own the house and you're renting your rooms, yes, you can do that.
Okay,
Because the Florida Statute 509 does not apply to hosted or your home when you're living there. That's the answer.
Simply for Sarasota Club?
Yes, because it's a Florida Statute 509, and that only applies to
Sarasota.
if you're renting the whole structure.
I only printed Sarasota counties, but Manatee probably. I was just telling Peter, I only printed Sarasota County regulations, but Manatee County probably has a similar description of exemptions on their tax collector site. If not, just call.
okay. And you had a question.
Yes, so this was just an answer to the question about who can help you with taxes. Airbnb does a very good job. If you have just one or two or few units, they will take over, they will bring it for you, no problem, just go with the password. If it's something larger, if you use the VRBO and the other sites, it's a great company called Avalara, and they do a great job as well. They're doing monthly available.
Okay, we've just been told that if you're doing Airbnb, apparently if you just have a few properties, they do a very good job of helping you with the taxes. VRBO apparently not so much. And there's a company called Avalara.
Yes.
Avalara that apparently can help you with that as well. So, thank you. Yes,
So you all gave the information about the limits for Sarasota County. What about Manatee County? Do they have the same 30-day limit? Do they have places aside from the barrier island where it's being paid?
Manatee and Palmetto don't have any restrictions other than if it's transit, then you still have to do the registration with the state and 30 days. City of Bradenton Beach, Palm Beach, and Anna Maria all have a different and quite frankly the most restrictive requirements and registration requirements and duties than Manatee or Sarasota.
Thank you.
okay. Another question that we have here is, and of course, oh, there we go. If you're renting just part of your house while you are there, are there rules and taxes that must be paid? Also, does that count as taxable income to the homeowner?
That's a good question. Anything under 14 days, you're not taxed as income. But anything over that, you will be. What was the other part of the question?
And are there rules and taxes that have to be paid based upon those rentals?
Rules and taxes have to be paid on the rentals. I think, yes, if you are getting that income, then yes, you have to.
Well, I think there's like the bed tax and that type of thing, if you're just renting out a little part of your home
Yes.
or short term.
Owner occupied is exempt, right?
Well, in Sarasota County, I'm not sure about
Renting
Manatee.
out a room does not need to obtain the license. Okay. Room rentals are not required by the county. So if you're, yeah, I guess it's exempt.
In Sarasota County, check on Manatee.
By the way, if this isn't frightening you a little
are you
bit,
confused?
it should. And by the way, that's one big part of this whole program, is to let you know, this is not easy. You don't want to just, well, my friend said, can I go ahead and manage a couple of properties for them and just go and dive in? You really need to know what you're doing before you get started. So great questions, and it just shows that's what it is. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to answer this one, because this is, why are there zero taxes if over 6 months? The simple answer is because that's the law. That's just the way that they've written it. That's what it is. So I like the question, and since I knew it, I figured I would jump in.
And Peter, to jump on that, in your real estate practice, I'm sure you come up with pre-occupancy, post-occupancy leases, and they really need to be leases, not part of the contract. But if they're leasing it out for a month, sales taxes due.
Well, what if you don't call it a lease and you call it an occupancy agreement?
The problem with it, if you do an addendum and do it by addendum rather than a lease puts you in the landlord tenant laws, which allows you to evict through the statutory process, which is very efficient and fast. If you keep it in the contract, then you have to sue under the contract, and that could be a year or two plus $10,000, rather than just a very efficient, fast, and cheap eviction process. And that is a major reason why you just, oh, it's just a couple of weeks, just do a little agreement or do an addendum. Don't do it.
That's good.
How much is evictions nowadays?
Question is, how much are evictions nowadays?
I don't do it.
I don't do that
It
either.
depends on the attorney firm that you use. I would say on a non-contested eviction, I can get it done for under 900.
Okay.
But if you do it under the contract, you're suing them, basically, it's a lawsuit, and 900 is just the filing fee, not including attorney.
You want to read that?
Do I want to read that? Okay.
So since we're on.
Since we're talking about post-occupancy agreements, it must be identified and accepted in offer. Under paragraph 19 addenda, there's additional terms letter U. Now, by the way, additional terms letter U, yes. There's a post-occupancy rider. Now, I'm going to warn all of you regarding the post-occupancy addendum and the pre-occupancy addendum. I do not recommend using those at all, because all they say is, we agree, after we sign this contract, that we're going to agree to terms upon which you can either stay in or I can move in early. And if we can't agree to it, the contract is canceled. Agree to it before you sign the contract and put it in the contract if you're going to do something like that, please. Okay.
And
Sorry, go
make
ahead.
sure you refer to a lease agreement.
Yes. Yes.
To keep it in the landlord tenant arena.
Okay. Typically, a post-occupancy agreement must be delivered within 7 to 10 days of acceptance. Usually for short term, yes, certainly less than 6 months. And by the way, this is an excellent point also. It's subject to association rules. You have to be careful here with your condominiums, which require somebody to be living there for at least 2 years before they're allowed to rent out. That could be a problem as well. And by the way, yeah, this is great. Who's responsible for paying these taxes, the sales taxes?
Owner.
Say it louder,
The
please.
new owner
So
would be required.
it's not the tenant that's required to pay the taxes? Oh, so is that something, Garrett, that should be addressed in a lease or in an agreement?
Absolutely.
Also, one other thing, the buyer's lender may not be on board with post occupancy, so you need to check with that as well.
Excellent point.
And then Gary's gonna love me, I keep giving him a plug. He does now offer a post occupancy lease. It mirrors their short-term lease. I'm sorry, I don't have a sample, but they do have some different language that they put on the top of it. But you could call them, get a sample, and it's $45. And if it's not executed, you can cancel within 30 days and get your money back.
And
So it's a great option. Do not use the par bar lease. Do not try to do a short-term lease with the par bar lease or a post-occupancy lease.
and one more time, again, please make sure that your broker approves the use of any forms. Okay, what about advertising for short-term rentals? Are there any restrictions?
Yes, there are restrictions in the cities that, that's basically the barrier islands. And you just have to, you'll see it in my handout of what the various restrictions are and what needs to be included in both the advertisement as well as the postings of the certain requirements within the property. And I think Holmes Beach Unit has 2 locations within the house that you have to post. But if you advertise, then you have to follow just the requirements of the different cities. And I think you've those set forth in your handout.
And do you also have to follow FREC requirements for advertising as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so remember, you have to have the name of your broker on there in at least the same size type as your name is going to be in there as well. be very careful with these things. In fact, I was talking to someone who had just been talking to Joanna Watkins, thank you, terrible. Who is, the chief person in charge of putting people away right now. She's in charge of a lot of these things. She said all she sees all day long on social media advertising for rentals, short-term mostly, is absolute total violations of the advertising rules. Please make sure you understand them and follow them. They're not coming after anybody yet, but boy, are they aware of it. Just FYI. Okay. Okay, the question is, what are the most violations that you see? That's a little bit beyond the scope of this class. And we just had actually a seminar all about FREC violations. So I can just tell you that, I don't know if you have something you can say.
There's a lot in property management. In fact, that's probably the number one complaints that Joanna deals with, I think is.
It is. Yeah. Property management is the number one source of complaints. And the number one source in FREC. And the number one source of different violations and problems that they see with realtors. Okay, again, this is not easy. All right, please learn what you're doing. What about mentoring? Do you recommend mentoring for somebody just getting into this?
Absolutely. If you can find a seasoned agent or broker who specializes in property management and they would be willing to mentor you, by all means, it's really worthwhile. My entry into property management was kind of forced. The company that I was working with was going under, and I was not even in the property management department, but I learned very quickly how the property management agreements worked and the leases worked to keep our company solvent, because that was a big piece of our company. And I did absolutely everything wrong. And the more I did wrong, the more I learned. But it's really important to get the training. There's tons of classes available online. Harry Heist, the evict.com site, they have videos that you can watch. NARPM is another great organization, the National Association of Residential Property Managers. The Sarasota Manatee chapter is very strong, but they have chapters throughout the state, and they have events throughout the state that are geared specifically towards property management, and you're dealing with your peers. So it's a great learning experience to be involved in one of their trainings or their meetings. They bring in relevant speakers, relevant topics, and I highly recommend NARPM.
Incredibly, to do property management or don't dabble, because you can get in trouble.
Great. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
I actually have a listing where the seller said, well, how about if I just do a, Airbnb while it's listed as well?
Okay. Well, this person had a question from a client, customer, who gave her a listing and said, hey, how about if I do an Airbnb while I have it listed as well? What the heck? Thoughts?
The problem is a violative of your listing agreement. Two, if you go under contract, does that violate the terms of the contract to be closed? Inspections, that type of thing. Number three, damage possibilities. What considerations do you have? It's.
Yeah, so I talk about this quite frequently at our sales meetings, because it's a challenge. The owners, especially if it's a leased property already, the owner wants to keep the tenant in place, and yet they want to sell the property. Those two things don't always work nicely. Statutorily, the tenants do need to allow access to the property with reasonable notice, supposedly 12 hours. Good luck, because there's many tenants who won't let you in, or they're not going to they're not going to coordinate their schedule with the time of the inspection, or the second showing, or the fourth showing, or so it's a conversation you really need to have with the landlord and say, do you want to sell the property or do you want to rent it?
Yep.
Because unless you have a tenant who is really extremely cooperative and doesn't mind, that's probably not gonna work.
And then what about if they don't get out? And it messes up your closing. They could blow the closing if the tenant doesn't get out and the seller has to evict. So the goal is to sell the property. Tell your seller to keep the big picture in mind.
Okay, and well, getting into it's kind of that question, how do you handle it when you have someone who has taken advance registrations for their property 1 month at a time? They're nothing crazy with that. And then they decide they want to sell it, and the new owner is willing to keep those people in place. What needs to be done?
Well, if it's VRBO, it's basically taking an assignment of those tenants, because it's really not a lease. So it's an assignment of those weeks, I guess. I've had it where the buyers don't want it and then the VRBO cancels it. But if it is a lease or arrangements that the seller has that extend beyond the closing date, then we'll do an assignment of leases at that point, assuming it's in the contract that the buyer will take those things over. And there is that provision in the contract that you mark the box, and then we have to do assignment of leases. We go back and get a stop rules, that type of thing.
Yeah, so in your listing agreement, it does state that you would, well, it should say that you get the lease ahead of time, and then also in the sales agreement, if it is a leased property, you're required to provide the selling agent that copy of that lease within 3 days. So if the owner has a silent lease that's expired, that's gonna be a problem, because when is the owner gonna give notice to this particular party that's in there? And how are you gonna gauge what occupancy date for possession?
And are they gonna get out?
So
Always.
those are things you need to consider pre-listing, and then also if you're selling a property that has a tenant in there, you really wanna make sure you get that lease within 3 days. And if it's an expired lease or a silent lease, oh, they've been in there 20 years, they'll get out. No, I would, I'll defer to you as to what language you would put in the offer, but I would make some addendum to make sure that they get a lease.
You know, if it goes, if the lease is expired, if there was one, then it goes on a month to month, it just continues, but on a month to month, and there are certain days requirements to give certain notices to get out for termination. If it's a month to month, you have to give 2-week notice
Prior to the pay period.
prior to the paper.
And who's gonna give that notice? You know, I
And-
mean, it's an owner responsibility, but the listing agent really should take on those duties, but how would you know that it would be done?
And speaking of agents taking on duties, I am aware, apparently, there are agents, management agents, who take on the duty of evicting tenants for their out-of-state customers. I see you're making a face. I know I make faces. What are the opinions on that type of an arrangement?
Well, I'm biased, but I think an attorney should do the eviction.
Okay. And you don't want to hear about it. Yeah, I mean, I personally also
None of
get,
our agents are doing
well, I know of some agents because they get a power of attorney, and they believe that they're allowed to do this. I don't know, I don't practice within that area, but apparently some people are getting evictions done, which is probably a little bit outside of the scope of what you should be doing.
And possibly practice law without a license.
Here. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about long-term leases. Garrett, what do you recommend for people to use? Is there a certain form that you prefer for a 1-year lease?
Absolutely. Number one, make sure you have a form, okay, and that it meets with all the statutory requirements. But yes, I think every law office has their own form that they have used throughout their, and it's constantly being updated and changed and that type of thing. So yes, it must be in writing, must meet statutory requirements, must meet all the different things that buyers and sellers, you know, we like to put in there, you know, pets, parking, you know, what happens if you don't return the keys. I mean, you know, because it's the contract between the landlord and the tenant. And if there's any dispute, we should be thinking about it, you know, what ifs in that contract. And that's what a lease is. A lease is a contract. And then, what happens if there's a default? The security deposit, holdovers, that type of thing. So, yes, is there one standard form throughout the state of Florida? There is the FAR bar, but even if we go above and beyond that, I'm sure every other law office does too. And if y'all have foreign leases, y'all may use those, but I think you gotta be very careful.
Our company uses attorney drafted lease only. Our agents are not allowed to use a FAR bar lease. That's just our company policy. So make sure you check with your broker as to what lease you could use, or they have an attorney firm that they'd like you to use if you are doing a lease. Also, I just wanted to go back to the listing that has a tenant in there, and there's, let's say it's an annual tenant, and the owner is self-managing the property. They're holding the security deposit, and they're holding advanced rent or pet deposits. I would not advise that those deposit transfers be put on the Alta. Because, well, on the owner managed, yes, I'm sorry, on the owner managed property, yes, but if the owner has a property management company, call that the property management company. They statutorily have to transfer those deposits to the new buyer. But if they have it on the Alta, your seller's going to be debited those amounts. And then the property management company is not going to automatically release those deposits to your seller. There's a whole big commotion that needs to go through in order to get those deposits transferred, because those are tenant monies. And you also want to make sure that tenant is current, and if there's any outstanding repairs. So I would also encourage a tenant estoppel if you're the selling agent on a property with a lease in place.
And the contract calls for an estoppel.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what would be in the estoppel?
Estoppel is a statement that the tenant gives to make sure they're current. Are there any advanced rents? Are there any security deposits? Any other requirements? Here we go. Any modifications? Does it allow subleasing? Lease term. Is there any defaults? Future rents during personal property, right to purchase? That type of thing. It's very important that an estoppel would, be nice to know if the tenant has a option to purchase or right of first refusal, right? That'd be a good one, or a right to terminate early, or a right to extend. Those are all major considerations that a potential buyer is going to want to know to purchase, make a decision to purchase the property or not.
Can a buyer who wants to move into the house force a tenant who has a lease in place to get out after they close?
No,
Unless there's a sale
they
and
pick.
purchase.
It's either sign a lease or get out.
No, there's a tenant in place.
Yep.
There's 6 months left on their lease. They're
have a
paying
written
their
lease.
rent. They have
Okay.
a written lease. It's a proper lease. Everything is fine. They're paying their rent. They've agreed to pay the rent to the new owner, but the owner says, no. My daughter's moving in here.
No,
You
no.
need to get out.
The buyer has to honor the terms of that lease, period. Unless the tenant is in default, but they have to honor the terms of the lease.
By the way, I get that question all the time. And I hope you realize that a lease is an agreement. It's a contract, and everybody's got to abide by it.
There are rare exceptions. There are some leases that actually have a due on sale clause, but there would be notice that the landlord would need to provide to the current tenant in order to get them out. So.
Yeah, that's very
notice-
rare. I never see those.
Oh, this is a good question. If an owner is selling a property with an annual lease in place, so it started off as a 1-year lease, but there's only 4 months remaining on the lease at the time of closing, does the new owner, are they responsible for paying for those taxes under a short-term lease?
Yeah, the new owner steps into the shoes as the old owner and has to remit those taxes as they're receiving it from the rents.
Right, but it was a 1-year lease originally, so there were no taxes.
Oh, so no.
That's it was a trick
No,
question.
there's no
Oh.
taxes.
Right.
It was like 4 months left.
Yeah, there's only 4 months
No,
left,
it's a
but
year
the
lease,
lease
year
is the
lease.
year.
Yes, that's a good question.
Yeah,
Trick question.
it was. Good trick question. Thank you.
But,
But
so the old owner would get a 1099 for months 1 through 8, and then the new owner would get 9 through 12.
Did everybody hear that about 1099?
What if they want to extend it 1 month after the 1-year lease?
Okay, the question now becomes, what if the tenant wants to extend 1 month after the 1-year lease?
You do a modification to the lease to extend 1 month and it's still a year lease, a month and a year. If you do a brand new lease for 1 month, then you fall back into the short term.
And what if you just let them hold over and be a month-to-month tenant?
It's still, I think it goes back to the terms of lease.
Great.
Of the original lease. The terms and conditions of the lease still continue
Yeah, they can.
for
do
that extra
month to
month.
However, if they had a 4-month lease and they did opt to go 3 months more, and they've already paid the tax, they're not gonna get the tax back.
Okay, everybody got that one? That's
Fun
kind of
scenarios.
Yeah, and again, you're going to see all of these. If you do this, you'll see everything. Okay. Let's see. Oh, generally speaking, why aren't realtors allowed to write leases for more than a year?
That's practice of law.
Okay, and what makes it the practice of law? Do you know?
It's creating contracts.
Okay, all right. Remember, you cannot write a lease for more than 1 year. All right, so please don't do that. If you need a lease for longer than 1 year, you need to have an attorney write it for you. What about the parties themselves? You have a seller, you have an owner who says, I don't want your lawyer's lease. I don't want your lease. This is the lease. I insist on you using. Are you allowed to use that lease?
My company most likely won't, but we'd have to have it reviewed by our corporate counsel.
Okay,
So again, ask your broker. Never say never, but check with your broker.
any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, it's horrible that, hey, I'm gonna save a couple bucks, print it offline, and I've seen, I'm gonna print off a Seattle lease and here's what's gonna go on. Well, no, it doesn't. From a landlord standpoint and tenant, it's not illegal. There's so many deficiencies in there that we'd say no.
Yeah, I'm assuming the lease was drafted by a Florida attorney
If
that
the
the
truth-
landlord wanted to use. That's-
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is most of the time we get these things, they find it on the internet, they print it off and say, here, use
that-
this.
no.
No, don't do it. Do it right.
And if you have a listing and you're the selling agent, you're the selling agent, and that's the lease that the listing agent gives you, be careful.
So you said agents, realtors are not allowed to write long-term leases. Are we allowed to write short-term leases?
Okay. The question is, I said that realtors are not allowed to write long-term leases. I just want to make sure nothing over 1 year. Short-term leases, absolutely. All right, you're allowed to, first of all, you are allowed to use the statutory form. That is a form, the FAR bar form you are allowed to use, but you can only fill in the blanks, just like with a regular contract. If you're going to use another form, your broker has to have said, yes, I'm allowing you to use this form. Hopefully he got it from an attorney. And basically all you're ever going to be filling in is name, address, and the amount of the rent. You're not going to put in any other little things, okay? All right, this is another good question. Oh, I'm sorry. go ahead.
But be careful trying to put in a round peg in a square hole. Make the lease fit the deal, even if you have to go to an attorney. It's very important that lease is correct, not trying to get it close.
Yeah, that's
What if it's
great
month to
advice.
month over a year?
Okay, the question is, what if it's month to month over a year? Can you explain what you mean by that?
They're going month to month, and it ends up going over a full year.
Okay, what if there's a lease that is, well, okay, so let me try and help redo this a little bit. Okay, when you have a month-to-month tenancy, usually either there was no lease, someone moved in under a verbal agreement, they can stay, or they're there under a lease and then they hold over afterwards. Which one are we looking at? Never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but
You just don't do it.
just don't do it.
Well, if it was a month to month and it carries on for 13 months, you're paying sales tax. Because it was originally a month and then it went to another month and went to another month. That usually a situation that's a verbal.
Yes, so at least do a 6 month and a day minimum on
Yeah.
that one.
And by the way, please don't let your customers do verbal leases. It's only gonna cause problems. This is another great question. Can you go over the path for agents to rent out investment properties of their out-of-state clients? Is there a path other than getting a license after the broker designation? I don't know what they mean by that. I'm sorry.
Well, do you have a? Well, they got to register with the DPPR and pay the fee, or I'm sure you go to a property manager's office and they have a packet that you sign up to be a client, right? Is that what they're asking?
I think they're asking, is there any question between an out-of-state owner and an in-state owner?
No.
No.
Okay, so the answer is, there's no difference, is exactly the same thing you would have to go through. And there's a lot of steps, just remember that.
The state will get accept their money as well as the in-state money.
Oh, yes, yes.
Unless they have to keep their funds in Florida. The out-of-state person
That's true.
has to have some sort of bank setup.
If it's an owner managed property, the out-of-state owner must keep the tenant deposits in a bank chartered in the state of Florida.
And in case,
That's a good
in
point.
case you didn't hear that, basically, if you have an out-of-state owner and you are not holding the money, they're holding their own money, they must keep it in a Florida state chartered bank. They cannot keep it out in wherever they might be.
Ozark credit
Right.
union.
Exactly.
They cannot mix it with their own money, they must be like an escrow.
It's supposed to be a separate.
It's supposed to be.
Okay, the question is it supposed to be a separate account? And the answer is,
Supposed to be.
what happens if it's not?
Most of them, it's not. They're still liable for the money.
Yes.
And so we do a transaction, we, transfer it and either the security deposit or last month's rent or whatever, it still gets transferred.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a law that says they must put it into escrow, but the law doesn't say, by the way, if you don't, this is what happens to you.
You might want to answer that other question in reverse as well.
Go
That's
ahead.
Probably the more common is that you have a client that you're doing business with here, and then they say, oh, I also own a property in another state. So the flipping it around
Great.
and answering it that way would be a good point.
Great question. The question is, what about when you have a customer who you're doing management for here in Florida, and they say, you do such a great job, can you please manage my properties in Georgia?
No, unless you're licensed in Georgia.
Unless you're
you're-
licensed in Georgia. Yeah.
You're affiliated with a brokerage.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Regarding the Airbnbs, I've been seeing some properties that they'll have maybe campers or tiny homes in the back of the property. Is there any type of permitting involved in adding additional RVs or campers back there? And also, I guess, whatever income the property makes as a whole, is that what's being taxed? Or can you have like separate corporations and several different businesses in one property?
Wow, okay, give me 1 second, because I've got to
Okay.
give this for everybody
Sure.
here. Boy, okay, if I get it wrong, please forgive me, there's a lot there. All right, the question is, what happens when you have a property with effectively more than one structure on it? And by the way, we're going to be starting to see that more and more because the counties are allowing auxiliary structures just for this reason. All right, what happens with that? Do you pay taxes altogether on one if it's for short term? Is it on each one you have to pay separately? How does this whole thing work out when you've got two different structures?
Well, first, there's one property, there's one remittance. Second, the owner of the property has to follow all code. It's either county or city, wherever it is, safety, whatever the code requires. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. They put 3 trailers in the backyard and start renting them out.
Tents.
What's that?
It's that in 4 tents, because tents are taxable, or
Yeah.
campsites,
But they have to, you have
RVs.
to register, if you have to register, you have to pay the fees. and follow the rules of whatever the code or city that's in. But it's one tax bill remittance each month, even though you have 4 different subtenants.
And generally, it's the landlord is the person who owns the property. And whatever is on the property is just the bonus. Now, I've had crazy clients who they own the property in one name. They then lease out the different structures to other companies, and they use those other companies to lease out to third parties. I don't know why they do it, because the cost is just insane. I don't see any value in that, but is there something I'm missing?
The complexity is great. I can see where you have friends that, hey, I'll take care of the management, you know, it's basically skirting the management
Yes.
is what they're trying to do.
Well, and many owners will want to deed the property in an LLC to, in an effort to limit their liability or perceived liability, but it's gonna be traceable back to the owner if
Yeah,
there's
ultimately,
issues.
the owner is responsible, they're the owner of the property, and they have to remit.
The one thing I do want to mention is that some owners, when we went to the out-of-state, in-state, some owners who lease out their properties and maybe they were living in that property and now are not going to be living in that property and leasing it out, they might lose their homestead exemption. So that's something that they forget about. Who reports this? I don't know, but maybe they find out from the HOA or, you know, I'm not really sure, but it's something that you might want to mention because that could be a significant increase in their taxes. And they need to talk to their insurance company and make sure they get the proper insurance for leasing as well.
Oh, and one other little caveat, and then I'll get to you because there's a good question here, but one other caveat on that as well. When the taxing authority finds out, it's not just, oops, okay, I guess I'll pay the difference. It's, oops, I gotta pay the difference plus penalties plus interest, and it goes up really fast.
And they can go back.
Yeah, oh, yes, they can go back as far as they want. No, it's
That's a
3 years,
Yeah,
3
something like
years,
that.
something like that, but still.
But it could be a big number.
Absolutely. This is a great question. Since most major banks have branches everywhere, how do you know if the bank is chartered in Florida? For example, how about, oh, I hate to use these banks. Well, how about any of the big banks that are too big to fail?
Don't
That's
name their names.
I don't like to mention the names.
Because there's some nationally, but yeah, they, national banks and locally chartered. How do you find out? Just
Call the bank.
call the bank or you call whatever the banking regulator is. And I'm sure they can give you a list of all what is chartered and what is not.
Yeah, and generally speaking, the national banks are fine. What you're going to be worried about more, like you had mentioned, is a local credit union, something like that. All right, because not all banks do business in every state. This is a question. I'm going to do this one. What is the fee range for property management charged by property managers? I'm sorry, but we are all realtors here. And we do not collude, we do not set rates, there are no fixed rates. We compete over these things. We cannot and will not discuss anything like that. I'm sorry. So, but thank you for bringing up the question. It's a good question, but we're not allowed to do that. Great, where was I? Somebody had a question, yes,
I
thank
just
you.
wanted to go over approach tenant landlord security deposit disputes.
Okay, the question is, can you just tell us a little bit about landlord-tenant security deposit disputes? That's a great question.
Right. If there is a dispute, there's a process statutorily that the tenant gives the landlord I want my deposit back. The tenant, the landlord has a claim. They have to do it in writing, I think within 30 days, and then they dispute it from there. Again, I don't do evictions, but I do know there's a mechanism to dispute it. So if landlord tends to make a claim on a deposit, they have to give written notice to the tenant.
And then what about our short term?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, the question was, what about short-term rentals? Is it the same thing? Do you have an answer for us?
So when we say short term, it falls into two categories. Is it a transient short-term rental, because if it's under a 509, then it's a different statute. If it's under 83, then you would follow chapter 83. The 509, I'm not sure what the dispute is because I don't do those, but that's something you would have to call DBPR.
And 509 is transient, 83 is landlord tenant.
Yes,
I 100% agree with you on the question of rates and that kind of thing, but that is something that a lot of new people are trying to figure out. And I would point back to what Kelly talked about is talk to your broker. Like if that's something you don't know about, they probably have experience. They know where they have felt they're competitive in. So there is guidance out there. If you don't know anything about what you're doing, talk to your broker about it, and you'll get good advice there.
that's an excellent point. And for the person who wants to know about the fee range, the correct answer really is talk to your broker if you have a mentor to find out what they have found to be good. But because of anti-competitive issues, we cannot discuss that here. Great, thank you.
And there's a variety of ranges and menu of services. So there's all sorts of ways to negotiate that as long as your broker is agreeable.
Can we discuss a little bit about commercial properties when you're going to go ahead and manage those? I don't know if there's anybody here who's interested in commercial. I know we have one, but maybe out there as
We can
well.
switch. Now you-
What's we're welcome to listen to you too, but what do you look for in terms of with a commercial building versus residential?
Well, that's a whole different animal. Gosh, that's a hard question to, where do you start and everything?
We've got
It's like the next
We've got
layer
45
of property
minutes, go for it.
management.
It's a whole different form than the landlord, than the residential lease. A commercial lease is depending on what type of property it is, a lot more complex. Is it within a shopping center? Is there CAM involved? Is it triple net?
what we can be.
CAM is common area maintenance. Is it one unit in a big shopping center? So you have the common areas that you got to deal with. Is it what we call triple net lease, or is it any type of other that? Does the landlord, does the tenant pay the taxes and insurance, that type of thing? Guarantees, because typically we in a commercial setting, it's dealing with entities, and then you have potential guarantees in there for that type of thing. What else?
As far as contract goes.
Yeah, there's just a myriad of different things. The residential lease is maybe 3 or 4 pages. The commercial lease could be 30, 40 pages. Rules, regulations.
And I'll point out that there is the Florida statutes that govern residential leases. There are no statutes effectively that govern commercial leases. So it's anything goes. And the theory is that if you are a commercial tenant, you have enough knowledge and ability to be able to handle your own negotiations with any commercial landlord, which, by the way, is probably not correct. But from the legal standpoint, that's how it works. So you have to be especially careful.
Another thing we talk about is tenant improvements, rights to extend, renew the lease, possibly even rights to purchase or right to first refusal, that type of thing. So it's a whole different animal, a lot more considerations to dig your heels into. It's fun.
How strict are the courts in enforcement of different parts of a commercial
Oh, it's
lease?
a contract. I mean, and there's attorney fees provisions in there, obviously, that if one party is in default, then the party that's suing, the prevailing party, gets attorney fees and court costs. But yeah, they're going to honor or enforce the terms of the lease as it is written. That's why it has to be a well-written lease. So there's ramifications. That's the teeth of the lease. Yeah, and possible damages in case there's some type of injury.
You do those kind of leases, commercial.
Did you have a question?
I don't know if this will fit the. If I have, what advice you can give a customer if they want to condition their garage and convert it into an efficiency, to rent?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. What happens if you have a customer who comes to you and says, what do? I want to convert my garage space into an efficiency apartment to rent out.
Good question. I think it's more legal than you. Number one, get with the city or county to make sure it is allowable under the code. And if it is, then you have to make sure you build it to code, the laws. That's pretty much my answer. You have to follow the rules and
Code
regulations.
enforcement is your friend on that one.
Okay, no, code enforcement is not your friend.
Well, call.
You gotta
find out.
speak to them
You're gonna
first,
have
and
to
you'll
speak to
find out if you don't speak to them first, they are not your friend.
And you don't, there's no easier to ask for forgiveness than permission on the thing.
No.
Don't do it thinking that, oh, you're just gonna slide through, because I think eventually you would caught. And you could possibly lose part of your, if not all your homestead, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, because there are some areas that allow it, but like it can only have a hot plate and not a stove, and there's certain weird nuances, so you definitely need to check with the county zoning.
There's also fire code rules as well in terms of getting in and out, so be very, the best advice is do not give them any advice other than
Where to call.
to either speak to an attorney or to speak directly with code enforcement to find out what they need to do.
So once you have that efficiency built code and all that, you can have a lease agreement. Legally, you can prove that, or it has to be as per renting a room in your own home.
Okay, the question is, once you have it built out, I'm going to go with the assumption it's built out to code, you filed for building permits and the permits are properly closed out. Can you now go ahead and rent out this efficiency?
I just deferred to our attorney.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
I
mean,
have
it's-
to look to him too.
It is, if it's within the house that the owner lives in, then you're exempt. But I still think you have to pay, if it's a short term, you still have to pay the sales tax.
And of course, I always get the question,
And make sure you have a lease on it.
yeah, I always get the question, but wait a minute, this was done long before I bought it. Isn't it grandfathered in?
Maybe, maybe not.
Okay,
That's the question.
is there a way to even tell?
Well, facts, you have to go shake the tree, get the facts. And the issue is you better well disclose it. If it's not built to code or built without permits, that has stopped many a closing. Where they, hey, it'd be great to have a little rental income over here, and they threw up some walls and.
And by the way, one second, just so you're all aware also, and to tell people if they're asking about this, one big problem is if they don't build it to code when it was built, and now they're going to try to get it permitted, they may have to actually take it all out and rebuild it to code, all the while under a under a lien for an illegal structure. It's a dangerous situation for your customers to be in, just so you know.
And pay a fine to the
Yes.
date that it was originally constructed without the correct permit.
Isn't there a problem with mail?
Yes.
The question is, isn't there a problem with mail?
Yeah, there's one mailbox out front.
Okay.
So but that could be part of the requirement to modify to a living space.
A or B,
Yeah, it's a mailbox, an additional
electrical,
mailbox address maybe required. I don't know. I'm not the authority called.
Again, that's all,
Zoning.
it all goes to code. I mean, they might be able to have one electrical where the landlord pays everything, they're paying a set fee. But again, the devil's in the details with the code. Where the property is located.
I do know there's some like guest homes out on Siesta Key or just around in different counties. You can call the zoning department in that particular county, and they will research it if it was grandfathered or not. So, but that would be grandfathered for the current owner, not
Yep.
Probably transferable to the new owner, so.
And I think, Peter, you referred to it, code enforcement is getting aggressive. And pretty much everywhere where I'm seeing it.
Do you do any code enforcement
No.
work? Okay, I've unfortunately been called in a couple of times now. And I'm gonna tell you right now, it's a pain in the neck. They want to see, first of all, you've got to pull your permit properly, and figuring out how to get that permit pulled after all of this is a pain in the neck. I had one client who made the mistake of starting a rehab with a licensed contractor, licensed in the city of Sarasota, who went and started doing the rehab without pulling a permit. Within 3 days, they were shut down. It took us, I think, 9 or 10 months to first get a permit issued. They will not close this thing out and negotiate with us the penalty until after the permit is closed out properly. And with the problems that we've been having getting materials and everything, it's been ongoing for about, God bless you, for about 1.5 years. It's just very ugly, and that's welcome to the world. Yes, the young lady in the back, who's now did you have a question? No, that's okay.
Yes, the case of that we were talking about, but with the homestead, if you lose the homestead, if you are ready to move for correction to your time.
Good question. The question is, if you're renting a room or a garage conversion that's done legally within your homestead, do you lose your homestead tax exemption?
Yes, possibly all or some.
And by the way,
This
this
homestead is for your primary residence, and they have a prohibition against renting, but there are some exceptions that if you rent part of it out, then you don't necessarily lose it all.
and what about the other homestead benefits that you get? Do you know if those are affected? I don't. I don't know if you
No,
know.
I mean, no.
Okay.
What about insurance?
What the question becomes now, what about insurance?
Insurance is another good question. You know, you have to read your policy, talk to your agent to say, if you do rent it out, you have to have either a supplemental or different policy to cover in case there's some type of a damage or casualty related to that.
Yeah, and if everybody is not aware of the insurance problems we're having in the state right now, every insurance carrier is looking for every possible excuse to say no coverage. So if you're renting that place out and you have an homeowner's insurance policy without renter's coverage, you are probably going to be out of luck. Just
They
so
love
you
to deny.
Okay. A question comes in, does Kelly handle rental properties for only BHHS agents or all agents? That is, if I have a customer looking for a rental property, does she handle that?
We will gladly pay you a referral.
In case you didn't hear, she said they'll gladly pay a referral. And wow, this is a nice one for Kelly. What tips do you have for vetting renters? Is there a standard form of questions you ask? And I'm going to add this one in. Are there any questions that you are not allowed to ask? And are there any questions that you better be sure to ask?
Sure. So our company actually has what we call a residential criteria selection sheet that we pass out to prospective renters. This was put together by a team of attorneys, and we've kind of narrowed it down to the best of the best questions that it's not really questions, it's a statement of what are our requirements to be approved for this property. So it's giving them the information, or the statement that we're looking for tax returns if they're self-employed. We're looking to verify their income. We're looking for some previous rental information. There's all sorts of things on there, but your company really should have some policy and procedure on what you're requiring to rent the property, and that should be given to the tenant prior to them making application. In addition, they should also be given the rules and the regulations for the association, if there is one, especially if they're driving a pickup truck and there's no pickup trucks allowed. You don't want that tenant to make application and then, oops, you can't have a pickup truck here. Well, why would I apply? So make sure that the tenant fully understands what your company is looking for. If you're requesting first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, pet deposits, whatever additional deposits, if there's an extra fee to transfer any amenities, any rules and regulations to the HOA, all of that should be given to the tenant prior to the application. And then also, what questions should you not ask? Obviously, if they are saying, they tell you they have a service animal or an emotional support animal, and if you see their disability is readily apparent, do not ask them for their paperwork. Let them apply. There will be no extra fee for that service animal or emotional support animal. If the disability is not readily apparent, then you may ask for documentation to make sure that that pet or that animal has the proper information or paperwork required to consider them a service animal or an emotional support animal. Because many associations will not allow pets for rentals. So it's very important that they have the proper documentation if it is a service animal or emotional support. And then obviously I wouldn't ask them if they had any felony charges. I wouldn't ask them about their source of income. I would just say that all sources of income are considered, but must be verified.
Another discriminatory question.
Go ahead.
And
Tell them that. Tell them.
Or any other discriminatory,
Yes.
questions or even, even in and around that arena. So you have to be very careful how and why, what, and what format you ask those questions.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask a question that I don't know the answer to, so I'm not supposed to do this. So I'm putting everybody on the spot, and I apologize, but what if I have 3 emotional support dogs and they only allow at most 2? Am I going to be able to force them to let me in anyway?
Depends. You would need proper documentation for each animal. If you have that, I would approve you.
Okay.
The association may not approve you, but then that's your fight with the association.
So are you allowed more than one?
You're allowed as many as
Than
your,
You yourself?
The question is, are you yourself allowed more than one support or service animal?
Yeah, there's different, there's 2 different categories.
So, and the answer is,
you're allowed as many as your medical representative states you may have or should have.
and is there any restriction on the type of animal?
Yes. I think what service animal could be a dog or a miniature horse.
I heard a pig.
A pig, yeah, pig, miniature
Cat.
horse, or a dog.
I think cats are also.
Cats.
And then
And a bird, yes, it's,
Well,
that's
the
a-
federal one, I think, is limited to the dogs, cats, and horses. And the service, but they're cracking down on that too, because they were bringing peacocks on airplanes and everything else.
okay, the question is, can you have an emotional support cobra? That's a pretty.
Yeah, they're cracking down on that.
Yeah, I think that might be a very strange type of issue, and
That's another seminar.
that's beyond the scope of this class.
there are companies who specialize in vetting the pets, or I mean, not pets, the emotional support and the service animals. So if you don't feel comfortable that you or your broker has the knowledge, pay the fee and use the service.
Okay.
Strictly on emotional support and service animals that I highly recommend.
And by the way, since we're, just one second, I'll get to you. This is another good question. I'm going to change your question slightly. It's must a no pets place, meaning you're not allowed to have pets. Must they allow emotional support animals, or does it have to be a service animal?
They have to allow the service animal. That's the federal. Emotional, again, I think it's a morphing situation. So you just have to see where you're going and what their position is.
Yeah, I'll give you my observations on all of this. If the association is saying no, and your customer is saying, but I've got to have them, I suggest you find them a different place to rent. Because they're not going to want to go through the lawsuit that they will have to go through in order to be able to stay. And I think we need to wrap up, please. I'm sorry, we have, I have to take one last question. I promised her I would do that. Go ahead.
I wanted to know more about the residential swimming pool safety act.
Oh, great question. She wants to know more about the Residential Swimming Pool Safety
I mean,
Act.
what do you have to have? Do you have to have the little gate thing?
What is,
Renting out a-
what's required?
I don't know.
I had it somewhere.
I have not researched that.
But you can find.
I can give you a little bit, okay? You do have, if you're going to be renting, first of all, thank you, okay. First of all, if you're going to be renting out a house and it has a pool, you are taking on huge risk. I talk to people all the time about how much insurance they need in order to protect themselves. And the general rule is $1 million policy is going to cover 99 point whatever it is percent of things. Yeah, it's rare, multi-million dollar judgments. However, if there's a pool and you're renting it to someone and you do everything possible, there's a child cage around it. You have splash guards. You have an alarm on all the doors. You have posters everywhere that says no use of the pool for anybody under 15 years of age unless there's an adult watching them. You're doing all of that. And mom has her 3-year-old child with her. She's on the phone. The child somehow gets out, falls in the pool, and is underwater for 7 minutes, doesn't die because, and I hate to say this, but this is one of the first things I learned in law school. It's cheaper to kill than to maim. All right. She doesn't die. She's now a vegetable the rest of her life. There's no amount of insurance that can ever help you. All right. So under the rules, the first of all, the house has to be isolated from access by an enclosure. So that would be usually your child gate that you have around it. Some people use just the lanai and the gate there. Okay, but it's got to be at least a 4-foot height barrier with no gaps, openings, protrusions, or structural elements that could allow a young child to crawl under, over, or through. By the way, notice it's got to be separate from the house. So if you have an attached lanai, that doesn't count. Okay, because you can get directly into it from the house. It has to be equipped with an approved safety cover. All right, generally, now I don't see here, I'm reading from what you gave me, but I believe also there are some other recommendations which are to have a splash alarm on there so that anytime it goes in, there's an alarm, and or an alarm on the doors so that when they open, people know that somebody's going in. I get scared anytime I hear somebody's renting out a house with a pool. And then the question becomes, well, what about a condo with a pool? Go for it. It's not your pool. It's the condo's pool. Okay, did that help?
But you gotta comply with the condo rules and regs, which are very strict because of the risk and insurance.
That's, you bet, you bet. Okay, great discussion. Oh, sorry. Did Kelly say there were updated property management rules when we started? I'm not sure what they mean either. Sorry, we're not sure what you mean by updated property management rules.
There's new ordinances that are in place for short-term rentals that just went into effect beginning of the year. And then also the sales tax or the tourist tax increased, I believe in just Sarasota County as of October 1, but check with Manatee as well.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Thank you all for participating and being a part of this. Thank you to our panelists.
All I can say is this right here is labor of love. This is worth a lot.
It's worth the price of admission and then some.
Exactly. I mean, this is valuable. Put it in a binder, don't lose it, use it.
And by the way, if you need their contact information, please just contact the board. They will be more than happy to provide it to you. If anyone has any further questions, I assume they can send them in and they'll get it
Yep.
over to Garrett.
Just
or to-
contact us, we'll do anything.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.